Hello, welcome back. Now, when you think about Nissan, you probably think of these cars that just are essentially wallpaper. And when you picture Honda, you probably also picture something similar, just the cars that fade away with time. Now, if you remember anything about these these brands that only make cars that are fine, it's that they sell well. The only reason why you see these cars so often, the only reason why you're so familiar with these cars like the Altima, the Civic, the Sentra, is that they sell well. Because they are cheap, because they are bland, because they fit in, they are perfect for the average consumer. Are you a school teacher with 17 cats? Get a Civic. Are you an architect with a wife and 2 kids? Get a Civic. Are you a lion tamer who has bulls charge at you? Get a Civic. Now, the reason why these cars sell so well and why they're attractive to the average consumer is not because they have special features that they like. It's not because they show off their individual, specifications, their individual talents, their individual preferences. No, no, no. It's just because it's a car with 4 wheels that gets decently fine gas mileage that will take them from point A to point B. And that means that these cars essentially rule the world. To the average consumer, there is no choice but between your average Honda Civic in gray and your average Toyota Camry in gray. So it's no wonder why these brands like Nissan and Honda sell really well. They make cars for the average consumer like Honda with the Civic and Nissan with the Sentra that are relatively cheap to buy, occasionally have some style aspect to them, but mostly people just buy them for the price. So it's safe to assume that these car companies are doing rather well off. Well, believe it or not anymore, really. These car companies like Honda and Nissan are kind of being sidelined in the next big purge of the auto industry. Now, when I say next big purge, you may wonder, what was the first big purge? Well, to understand when the first big purge happened, we need to look at the car industry around 2005. So, to get an idea of the car industry in 2005, we must look at what cars the consumers were buying. And a great way of telling that is what were the 10 best selling cars in the United States in 2005. This is going to be mainly a US focused video, but I think it'll also apply to other countries. I'm sure it will, since our car industries overlap a lot of times. The Ford F Series was the best selling car. That's your anywhere from the F-150 to the F-850. I think the F-550 is the highest they make. Not important. The Chevrolet Silverado, second. Toyota Camry, third. Then the Dodge Ram when it was a car instead of an entire whole-ass brand. The Honda Accord, the Honda Civic, the Nissan Altima, the Chevrolet Impala, the Chevrolet Malibu, and of course the Chevrolet Trailblazer, which was the only SUV to break the top 10. Another important item to look at when looking at the car industry is the average price of used and new cars, with the average price of a new car being $23,000 and the average price of a used car being around $8,000. Now, these are most of the major car brands in 2005. Just forget about Infiniti here. And you can see, when you look at them, most of them are independent, individual car companies. You've got Toyota Lexus, you've got GM all up in there at the top, you've got Ford by itself, Dodge by itself, Honda by itself, you've got Suzuki, you've got Mitsubishi. It's overall a very well laid out car industry. It's very separate and very diverse, right? Except for maybe General Motors. But other than that, each car company, also forget Infiniti, I don't even believe it was around no, Infiniti was around in 2005, scratch that. They're all kind of their own independent car companies, maybe with their own subsidiaries, but they're all very distant from each other. And this led to more of a free market. Now, you have to remember another thing that happened just 20 years earlier, and that was the Japanese assimilation of car companies into the American auto industry. You had Toyota and Honda coming in and beating the Americans at their own game with paying their workers slightly more, with building better quality vehicles, with building vehicles, especially during the oil crisis, that were better on gas. The Japanese car makers like Honda and Toyota absolutely, they just took over like you wouldn't believe. And since, it's been a few years, other Japanese car companies and foreign car companies were entering the United States in hopes of also assimilating into the United States car industry, like Hyundai, Kia, all those car companies, with hopes of making better cars than the Americans, and more importantly, selling better cars. Think about when you're trying to plant something. If you're trying to plant something in a very rocky area, it's going to be very hard for the roots to take, especially if the soil is very hard. This car industry, the only boulder there was really GM, and that had already been beaten by big car companies. They weren't really giants, but big car companies at the time, like Honda and Toyota. So there was essentially no boulders in the ground. There was nothing to keep smaller car companies like Kia, like Mitsubishi, like Suzuki, all those smaller car companies from sprouting up into the American auto industry and flourishing, right? It was fertile soil and there were barely any big boulders to get around. If you made a good car, people would buy. So, what exactly was the big gigantic purge? What happened to destroy this gigantic, open, free market with no bounds in the American car industry? Well, unfortunately, the pot that all these car companies were in got squashed by a bunch. People were buying less cars, and things got very heated and very competitive fast. And that was, of course, the wonderful, not so great 2008 financial crash. Look at that big, gigantic raise, and then that enormous crash. Now, there were a lot of causes of this. There was hedge fund trading, there was adjustable rate mortgages, but one thing that was definitely for sure about the 2008 financial crisis is that things were rough. Now, I was born in 2005, and in 2008, neither of my parents had jobs and were looking to sell the family house that they had bought just 2 years earlier. Everything was so bad, prices, the economy, people just weren't buying new cars. If they were buying a new car, if they were 16 and they were looking for a car, they weren't going to walk down to your local Toyota dealership and buy a Toyota Yaris. Absolutely not. They're going to buy a $500 car from their neighbor that's probably been crushed several hundred times. That big, open, airy market soon turned up. It quenched. Everyone's roots were on top of each other. No one could spread out. No one could gain more market share. Things were bad, and companies suffered. Even if they didn't go bankrupt, with Suzuki and Saab mainly going bankrupt, well, Saab and GM and all that crap. But, with Suzuki closing, and of course Saab closing as well, car companies were hit hard. Subaru, especially these smaller car companies, Fiat, Mitsubishi, Subaru, Kia. These car companies were hit hard. Honda, Nissan, Scion wasn't really around. I think, were they around? Scion was around. They were all hit hard. And even if they didn't close, they were still practically in financial ruin. There were several not write offs, several grants, the government gave a lot of American car companies, specifically for GM and Chrysler, the Detroit auto industry, they had to give them, some of the biggest car companies at the time, checks to keep them alive. Imagine if it was that bad for them. Imagine how bad it was for all the smaller car companies. And that really did some damage. Now, 3 years later in 2011, the economy had healed itself and car companies were still doing well. But the 2008 financial crisis hadn't just bankrupted some companies and swept them out, it had hurt them in ways on which the average person wouldn't really think about. It didn't really bankrupt as many companies as it did ruin their competitiveness. Think about this. Imagine you're a small car company and you survived the 2008 financial crisis just barely. You just have a few more coins in the purse that you can maybe take out if you want to. You are Suzuki, which stayed around until 2014. You're Mitsubishi. You're all these tiny car companies. Now you have to be competitive. You have to pay to redesign your models. You have to pay to put new models on the market. You have to pay to do research into those new models. You have to pay to stay competitive. And a lot of these car companies just didn't have the money anymore. So if you're wondering why maybe your favorite car company wasn't all that competitive in 2011 and later, they just didn't have the money to be. That's what killed off a bunch of car companies and killed off a bunch of project cars that were supposedly going to happen in that era. So what's happening with Honda and Nissan? What is making them struggle so much to the point where two car companies that have nearly nothing to do with each other might have to merge, even in the first place, even that being considered as a plan? Well, the plan didn't get squashed. The plant outgrew the pot. Now, when you think of it today, you see a lot of car companies. There are a bunch out there. Exclude all the non-American ones for now, even though you can look at them. And just notice how many individual car companies there are. Look at all the different logos, and then look at who they're owned by. That's right, nearly every single car company is owned by someone. Your favorite car company, if it isn't on this list, it's probably independent. But I want you to think off the top of your head, how many other car companies are there that are not on this list? I can name one, Subaru. And other than that, that's it. How many other independent car companies can you think of that have managed to survive? Barely any. Now, this happened for a lot of reasons. Now, remember how the smaller car companies were in kind of financial ruin? Well, those big car companies with their big checks and everything figured, hey, it's 2013, it's time to do some spending. And they bought up all those smaller car companies that were in financial ruin because they were cheap. It's like buying a gumball at a dispenser. And the effect of all of that was this car auto industry that is so heavily cluttered by all these car companies that are mainly all owned by the same, what, 8 car companies? And if we look at the pot now, you can see there are so many big plants. They are just absolutely crushing the smaller car companies around them. All the smaller car companies that haven't been bought up already are absolutely being grinded and crushed relentlessly by these bigger, huge conglomerate car companies to a point where even the gigantic big conglomerate car companies are pushing up against each other. This chart doesn't only represent car company ownership, it also represents the pot, the American car industry, which all of these car companies live in, and how crowded it is. How, look at all these boulders here that you have to get around if you're a new up and coming car company. And just like that, like clockwork, the biggest of the big car companies were starting to grind up against each other. It was ridiculous. An analogy that helps me understand the car industry is think about Holden and how it died in the 2010s to the 2020s, the last years of the All Australian Car Company. The issue there was that you had the Captiva against the Holden Malibu, which were both front-wheel drive 4-cylinder cars. It's all these cars that are the same from the exact same car company competing against each other. Now, technically that means everybody wins, but no, everyone loses. There's no winner here. So I hope that kind of helped you understand why a Honda-Nissan partnership would be crucial in the first place. So let's look at the history of the partnership itself. The partnership started off when Honda announced it December 23rd, 2024. Now, you have to remember something that people often gloss over was that the original partnership was going to be between Honda, Nissan, and Mitsubishi. Remember, 3 small-ish Japanese car companies that definitely were affected by the 2008 financial crisis. The original partnership was designed to have Honda, Nissan, and Mitsubishi all kind of share parts. Now, Mitsubishi's MyVec engines had been in Nissan cars, Nissan CVT transmissions had been in Hondas and Mitsubishis, so hey, what the hell, why not make it official and have each car company buy some stock of the other, that way they can trade parts, share warehouses, and share stuff. This is not a merger, it's a partnership, or what they like to call it, a strategic partnership. Remember that scene in Golden Girls where Stan and Dorothy pretend to have to be married, and then they're gonna get married, they're gonna renew their vows, even though they've been divorced for a while now, and yet the priest that came over, because there's a hurricane, so they're all forced to stay in the same house. Golden Girls is great, you should watch it. Okay, don't get mad at me, but seriously, that's my favorite show. Remember that, and then the priest is like, I am not the priest. Remember that episode? That's kind of what happened here. Honda, Nissan, and Mitsubishi were going to join the partnership, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Nissan was like, I need you to Honda. Like, they like, I am not the real car company, I need your help. That's exactly what happened. Wow, that is I'm Italian, but that is a horrible Italian accent. Anyway, yeah, essentially, Nissan came to its knees, and it started crying at Honda, let me in, let me in. And so, just like that, they decided, what if it's just Nissan and Honda? And they went with it. They decided to start forming a merger. Honda and Nissan would partner together to become, believe it or not, the world's 3rd largest car company behind Volkswagen, which is currently shuttering its doors, and Toyota, which can't figure out for the life of itself how to make a damn car. Now, other than possible fears of a monopoly, which it's only the 3rd biggest, any person with rational thinking will probably think this is a pretty decent idea. You know, everyone's kind of happy, everyone brings in the bacon. What's the big issue, aside from the one stated before with Holden and competitiveness? They clash. They clash real bad. So yes, one of the reasons why the merger ended up falling apart is because they clash real bad. The HR-V would be directly competing with the Kicks, the CR-V would be competing with the Rogue, the all-new Passport would be competing with the Pathfinder, the Aria would be competing with the Prostate. It was all just an absolute bad match. These two car companies fit about as good together as a hot dog would with buttercream icing. Well, there's your answer. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if I got anything wrong in the comments. I did a bunch of research for this video, so I'm sure that I most likely did not, aside from small stuff. And let me think, do you think a Nissan-Honda merger would be cool? I hope this video, again, gave you some insight into the car industry and kind of what happens. And believe it or not, this will not be the last of the car industry like some people will be telling you it is. This happens every once in a while where the fertile lands of the car industry start to run dry. And with that, I'll see you soon.